It's time to eliminate prejudice and biases. No, folks, I'm not actually going to make a social commentary here, but greenbacks matter. Folks, offshoreinsiders.com brings you this podcast. And of course, we are the top source for winners years around. Going back to the 1980 scorephone days is where we trace the roots. You got the master lock line, the power of more than 620 sports services behind each and every play. Top technical handicapper Stevie Vincent and America's greatest handicapper, me, Joe Duffy, the anchor of offshoreinsiders.com and the winningest handicapper of all time, www.offshoreinsiders.com. Now, I always knew this was true, but even, in my, I've been in the business since 1988, so I think this is my 29th year in the business publicly. Not to mention, I've literally been handicapping at one form or another just for fun and whatnot for about 40 years. But, and we'll talk about specifically what really got me to do this podcast and to kind of reiterate the obvious, but among the biases I've heard over the years that squares will make, and even some mediocre professional handicappers, and quite frankly, when I think of the handicappers that made statements like this, none of them are in the business full time anymore, and there's a good reason for that. But they'll say something like, every time I bet on or against the Steelers, I lose. I refuse to bet on a game involving the Steelers anymore. They always seem to screw me. And that's a big mistake. Every single person, whether it's me, whether it's Billy Waters, whether it's Right Angle Sports, certainly we know Phil Steele, they go on plenty of slumps overall, much less with, I know it gets frustrating with certain teams. You think you can't quite get an angle on those teams. That's just a dumb thing to do, to flat out eliminate any games involving a certain team just because maybe you've lost 6 of the last 7 times you've bet for or against the team. But it's really a common thing that I've heard over the years. In fact, in reality, we use that to our advantage, what we call predictably unpredictable teams, but that's another story altogether, and we've discussed that in other articles and videos and podcasts, etc. But teams like that seem to be so erratic, they're predictably unpredictable, and we have a formula where we exploit such teams like that. One of my all-time favorite biases that I hear from square players, something along the line, look, if I'm going to lose, I'm not going to be betting on Vanderbilt at Alabama. If I'm going to lose, I'd rather lose betting with Alabama, for example. A bad team against a good team. When you got a mismatch, people are like, I'm never going to bet on the bad team. And that's what I call psychological juice. Somehow, if you bet on the inferior team and you lose, it hurts more than when you bet on the superior team, and that's just dumb. As a very general rule of thumb, I always say that handicapping is the art of finding the undervalued against the overvalued team. Now, you can't really sum up handicapping in 1 or 2 buzzwords or lines or anything like that, but there's a lot of truth to that, and the truth is, as a general rule of thumb, the very good teams are more likely to be the overvalued teams, and the bad teams are more likely to be undervalued. But nobody's going to hit 100%. Don't charge yourself what I call the psychological juice. You got to be willing to go with bad teams. And maybe that wasn't that good of an example, because obviously when I'm talking about Vanderbilt at Alabama, I'm talking about college football. Well, ironically enough, college football is the one and only sport where a lot of our best systems are actually going with favorites. But in other sports, for the most part, going with the inferior team and the underdog is a good play more than vice versa. But that's why bookmakers make so much money, because the public loves to bet favorites. And even more specific, NFL road favorites. I tell this story quite a few times. As you know, I do some videos with SBR Video, and I tell this story a few times a year when I do the videos with Peter Loshak. But every time, I have a friend who's maybe a casual bettor. They like to handicap their own games. Maybe it's even somebody who's playing a $20 or $50 parlay card at work, or just guys that are big fans and they kind of like to handicap games themselves just for fun. They're not betting big money on it. And yes, very much those inferior handicappers, guys who aren't doing it full time but think that they're good handicappers and do it part time. I hear them say, oh man, there's a game I absolutely just love this week. It's one of the strongest games I've seen. I can't believe the line. And I always interrupt them. I say, okay, what NFL road favorite is it? And inevitably, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be an NFL road favorite because, again, you have for a team to be an NFL road favorite, they're certainly the superior team. And usually they're laying a little bit more than 3 points, but they'll say, well, the Patriots, my God, how are they only laying, 4.5 points to the Philadelphia Eagles or to the Jets or whatever. And so this bias for road favorites. You got to realize home field advantage is big in the NFL. 3 points at home is big. 4 points, 5 points. So this love affair with NFL road favorites, in fact, you got to like home dogs. A lot of our best systems have home dogs. I'm not saying blindly bet home dogs, nor never to bet road favorites. But this obsession, this bias towards NFL road favorites, that's what really keeps bookmakers in business. Now, again, in recent years, and I didn't do an exact breakdown or study before this, so I'm kind of making a general statement without, documenting the exact accuracy of it. I will say in recent years, NFL road favorites have been a little bit better than long-term, if I'm not mistaken, but still, this bias towards NFL road favorites cost you money. There's a very good chance that you do. Now, let's talk about my own biases. What has really kind of motivated this little podcast that I'm doing? For years, I will flat out admit I was allergic to chalk. I've made so much money betting on underdogs or small favorites. And when I saw a game that I loved using my metrics and the metrics I had available to me at the time, I'm like, yeah, but I got to lay 150, 160. And there's where I admit I wasn't always following my own advice. I was charging myself psychological juice. When I'd lose a 160 favorite, it was almost too painful. Now, in that case, you are literally paying a little bit more juice. But when as I continue to get better and better with computer software, and I've purchased some ass-kicking systems, I've traded some systems, and now in baseball, some of my highest both ROIs and units won are in baseball. And you look through them, and in quite a few cases, you've got to bet those big favorites. And I had to kind of see it in my own two eyes, and the dollars and cents were some of these powerful systems. Now, they're not necessarily chalk systems, so to speak, but in many cases where it favors a certain team, it is a chalk. And then even under those circumstances, maybe I need that psychological reassurance. I'll say, well, what would happen if we only bet this system when I'm betting like a 150 to a 200 favorite? And I'll see with my own two eyes, yep, the system even wins with big favorites. Now, that's almost the opposite of the bias a lot of other people have, but that's an example of on my own. One of the reasons I've gotten better in baseball, if that's possible in recent years, is I've been able to eliminate my own bias against betting big favorites. Look, I've bet more big favorites that in the past would have been passes. Not like I would have bet the other side or anything like that. I've released more plays in baseball than I have in the past, in part because I've eliminated, no, not in part, really 100% due to the fact that I've been able to finally eliminate my prejudice against those big favorites, and maybe having the sophisticated computer software that basically proved me wrong, that I shouldn't have been so afraid of big chalks all the time. That has really helped. And in fact, again, I guess that really bleeds over to other sports. I always had a little bit more of a bias towards underdogs. Now, that's good in virtually every single sport. Most of the systems are underdog systems that are my best systems. Again, that's a general rule of thumb. College football is the one exception. College football has definitely proven to be a big momentum sport, and in just the last 3-4 years, whereas my winning percentage and my return on investment, my units, everything, where has improved the most? College football. Why? Because the computer broke it down for me and said, look, stop always having a bias towards underdogs. Sometimes you got to go with favorites. And the truth is, again, why have I gotten even better in college football? Because I'm not afraid to pick favorites as I have been in the past. Laying that big number, I don't have that fear anymore. So again, even a successful handicapper like me, when I was in the business for 15 years, I'll admit I still had some biases. Nobody's perfect, and I guess I probably still do, but one of the many kind of intangible advantages of having the best computer software in the business is you can kind of see in pure numbers when you have this mind trap. So again, eliminate biases. Ask yourself, what are those biases? I gave you some examples, and you probably can think of some of your own now, but just go straight with the facts. You want to be, what we wish that all Supreme Court justices were. You just go by the facts at hand, not any biases. So you can see, people at the highest level in every single profession have biases, but I really think, computer software has not only made my job easier because it's isolated some systems, but it's kind of forced me, literally forced me to eliminate any of the, preconceived biases that I have and examples that I've given. You want the winningest picks in the industry? Joe Duffy's picks at offshoreinsiders.com. www.offshoreinsiders.com. Your NFL specialist, Joe Duffy's picks.